the states are duty-bound to interpose. That's how James Madison put it in his Virginia resolutions against the hated Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. And those resolutions answer a timeless and essential question. What should be done when the federal government goes beyond the limits of the Constitution? And for us today, that is literally 24/7, 365. So on this episode, I'm going to reveal 6 essential and timeless principles that make up James Madison's plan to stop federal tyranny without waiting for the federal government to magically do what it pretty much never does, limit its own power. And they all come from those resolutions which were passed on December 21st and Christmas Eve, December 24th, 1798, a pretty sweet Christmas present from the father of the Constitution. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Friday, December 20th, 2024. And let's get right to these 6 essential principles from the father of the Constitution. First of all, it's the duty of the people of the several states, duty of the people in the states to watch over the federal government and to oppose all unconstitutional acts. Here's how Madison put it in those Virginia resolutions. This assembly most solemnly declares a warm attachment to the Union of the States, to maintain which it pledges all its powers, and that for this end, it is their duty, not just a good idea, not just something to think about later, but their duty to watch over and oppose every infraction of those principles which constitute the only basis of that union. Now, this was basically how the Federalists sold the Constitution to the people who were considering it during the ratification debates. A really prominent example comes from John Dickinson, the penman of the American Revolution, the primary drafter of the Articles of Confederation, I would say. He put it like this in Fabius number 4 in 1788. It is their duty to watch and their right to take care that the Constitution be preserved, or in the Roman phrase on perilous occasions, to provide that the Republic receive no damage. So principle number 1 is that it is the duty of the people in the states to keep the federal government within the bounds of the Constitution, whether the federal government happens to like it or not, and they generally do not. And number 2, that means they have to defend the Constitution and liberty against all enemies, foreign or domestic. Back to Madison's resolutions. Resolved that the General Assembly of Virginia doth unequivocally express a firm resolution to maintain and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of this state against every aggression, either foreign or domestic, and that they will support the government of the United States in all measures warranted by the former. So he's saying, now he's not talking about aggression like they're being invaded by some army. He's talking about aggression, using that term to describe a federal government that is, well, violating the Bill of Rights, violating the limits of power in the Constitution itself. And again, this is how things were sold during the ratification debates. Even Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 28 put it like this: it may safely be received as an axiom in our political system that the state governments will, in all possible contingencies, afford complete security against invasions of the public liberty by the national authority. They can readily communicate with each other, he said, in the different states, and unite their common forces for the protection of their common liberty. And it's very interesting to me, the type of language that they're using. Again, violations of the Constitution were seen as, by Hamilton, invasions of the public liberty. This is a wartime kind of terminology. And Madison in 1798 called them aggressions, whether by foreign or domestic. So number 2 is you got to defend the Constitution and liberty against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Number 3, the federal government is an agent of the people of the several states and not their ruler. Madison put it like this: this assembly doth explicitly and peremptorily declare that it views the powers of the federal government as resulting from the compact to which the states are parties. He's referring to the Constitution as a compact among the states or between the states. If you listen to Brian McClanahan, longtime friend of the TAC, I've learned so much from him over the years. Well, you definitely should if you're not. He often refers to the compact theory as the compact fact. And I'm sure he would probably berate me for calling it theory, but just so you're aware. But anyway, so the powers of the federal government come from that compact, from the Constitution, as limited by the plain sense and intention of the instrument constituting that compact, as no farther valid than they are authorized by the grants enumerated in that compact. So, just to explain a little further here, James Madison, in his report of 1800, a couple of years later, he went into some detail explaining all the principles and the meanings of these resolutions of 1798. And he made very clear that the meaning of the word states in this context does not necessarily mean the plot of land or the state government in and of itself. He said, "It is indeed true that the term states is sometimes used in a vague sense, and sometimes in different senses, according to the subject to which it is applied. Thus, it sometimes means the separate sections of territory occupied by the political societies within each, so the geographic area, sometimes the particular governments established by those societies, sometimes those societies as organized into those particular governments, and lastly, it means the people composing those political societies in their highest sovereign capacity. Sovereignty in the American system means final authority." And again, in that report, he's very clear that the version of the word states, the context from the Virginia resolutions of 1798 is this. He said, "In the present instance, whatever different construction of the term states in the resolution may have been entertained, all will at least concur in that the last mentioned, because in that sense the Constitution was submitted to the states. In that sense, the states ratified it, and in that sense of the term states, they are consequently parties to the compact from which the powers of the federal government result." Again, the states created the federal government, not the other way around. When you're saying that, you mean the people of the several states, not the state governments. And Madison was very emphatic and clear about that. Here's how John Jay described this relationship between the people of the several states, and their agent, the government. He said, "The Constitution only serves to point out that part of the people's business which they think proper by it to refer to the management of the persons therein designated. Those persons are to receive that business to manage not for themselves and as their own, but as agents and overseers for the people." I covered these concepts, these principles about sovereignty and government acting as an agent of the people of the states in an episode earlier this year. Sovereignty in the Constitution, government as agent of the people of the states. It'll be linked to in the show notes. And I should mention that Alan Mosley organizes a blog post for every episode. And in it, you're going to find a show links or a show links section, reference links, where you can kind of go along with the things that I'm pointing out in this episode. Obviously, we're primarily looking at James Madison's Virginia resolutions of 1798, his report of 1800, but I've got a bunch of other original source documents from Dickinson, Hamilton, this other episode I just mentioned, and the like. And that way you can read and learn more in context on your own time, because I'm just scratching the surface. Again, Alan Mosley will get that organized, and I will get it published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty in just a couple of hours after this live stream is done. So let's move on. Number 4 is the danger of precedent. And we're not just talking about precedent, stare decisis on the court system, the precedent of going beyond the limits of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson in 1791, when he was railing against Alexander Hamilton's First National Bank, the Bank Bill, he said to take a single step beyond the limits of the Constitution is in essence, and I'm paraphrasing, giving them a boundless field of power. Because once you establish the precedent that they are authorized to do something that they're not authorized to do, there is no real limit to their power at all. Now, anyways, back to James Madison's Virginia resolutions of 1798, that this state, having by its convention, which ratified the federal Constitution, he's referencing the Virginia ratifying convention, their ratification documents, made some things pretty clear about their views of how things were supposed to be. They expressly declared, quote, that among other essential rights, the liberty of conscience and of the press cannot be canceled, abridged, restrained, or modified by any authority of the United States. Madison continued, and from its extreme anxiety to guard these rights from every possible attack of sophistry or ambition, recognizing that people with power are definitely going to go after the liberty of conscience and of the press, because if you can't think and speak, and you can't speak out and print and communicate with others the stuff that the government is doing that they're not supposed to be doing, well, government's going to get away with a ton of things. So there was an extreme anxiety to guard these rights. He said, having with other states recommended an amendment for that purpose. First Amendment, of course, which amendment was in due time annexed to the Constitution. He said it would mark a reproachful inconsistency and criminal degeneracy if an indifference were now shown to the most palpable violation of one of the rights thus declared and secured, and to the establishment of a precedent which may be fatal to the other. So, TLDR, too long didn't read Madison here. If you let them get away with violating any part of the Bill of Rights, any part of the Constitution, any amount of your liberty, this establishes a precedent for them to do the same to other liberties, to other freedoms, to other parts of the Bill of Rights. And we shouldn't be surprised that allowing that to happen leads to, well, the largest government in the history of the world. 2 years prior to this, George Washington had a very similar observation and warning in his farewell address, 1796. It was first drafted by James Madison in 1792, reworked by Hamilton in 96. But here's how he put it. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. So, Washington's saying, look, if you think they need more power, he's not saying go do it, but if the people of the states think this needs to happen, there's a process in the Constitution to make it happen. But he said, let there be no change by usurpation. So if you want to expand the power, go for an amendment. But don't just let them exercise the power anyways. That's a usurpation of power. That's a theft of power from the sovereign people of the several states. St. George Tucker later called usurpation treason against the sovereignty of the people. Injuries and usurpations, that's the real term, or abuses and usurpations. These are the terms that were actually used in the Declaration of Independence rather than what we call them, grievances. So Washington said, let there be no change by usurpation, for though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. So usurpation of power, exercising additional power beyond the limits of the Constitution, is a weapon to destroy freedom. The precedent, he said, must always greatly overbalance in permanent evil any partial or transient benefit which the use can at any time yield. Again, another TLDR. The short version is, even if you like the results of them doing stuff they're not supposed to do, you have to continue opposing it, because if you don't, you've established a precedent and permanent evil. So next up is number 5. Consolidation is tyranny. Here, first, Madison points out that the General Welfare Clause, even in 1798, is already being twisted and turned and stretched out of the original version into authorizing basically whatever they want, a kind of a reservoir of vast and nearly unlimited power. And he said that indications have appeared of and it was intentional is what he's getting at here, that indications have appeared of a design to expound certain general phrases, which having been copied from the very limited grant of powers in the formal Articles of Confederation, were the less liable to be construed. I should explain that. The General Welfare Clause was basically what Madison's saying is basically copied from the Articles of Confederation, and it was done so because everyone understood how it applied in the Articles, and it was very limited. The Articles of Confederation were not something that, it was not a constitution that really authorized a general or federal government to have all kinds of power. And he's saying, like, look, we did this on purpose. We should know what it means. But anyways, these people have an intentional design to expand that power so as to destroy the meaning and effect of the particular enumeration. And he discussed this elsewhere as well, basically saying if general welfare means whatever they want, why do you even have anything else listed out? And that's what he's getting at here, which necessarily explains and limits the general phrases. And the result of this, Madison said, is the dreaded consolidation or centralization of power. He said, so as to consolidate the states by degrees into one sovereignty, the obvious tendency and inevitable consequence of which would be to transform the present Republican system of the United States into an absolute, or at best, a mixed monarchy. Man, for a guy who really wanted much more centralized power when he started out, he really, really hammers this one home. Here's James Wilson, also during the ratification debates in November of 1787, also hammering on the idea of a total consolidation of the states into one government. Although I think in some ways he wouldn't have been too opposed to these types of things. Anyways, to support with vigor a single government over the whole extent of the United States would demand a system of the most unqualified and the most unremitted despotism. Or as Patrick Henry put it on the other end of the spectrum, Federalist to Anti-Federalist, during the Virginia Ratifying Convention, he said, consolidation must end in the destruction of our liberties. And so Madison's taking this, Madison and Patrick Henry were arguing against each other during the ratification debates. And also here in 1798 and 1799, they were flipping sides. It's fascinating to kind of get into that. If you're interested, maybe I can cover that in more detail in a future episode. But in 1788, he's saying consolidation. This is a consolidated system. Madison's saying, no, that's not what's going to happen. And now in 1798, Madison's saying, well, look what they're doing. They're twisting the meaning of these clauses. And the only thing that's going to happen is it's going to consolidate the states. It's going to be a consolidated system. Here's how Henry put it in 1788. Dangers are to be apprehended in whatever manner we proceed, but those of a consolidation are the most destructive. And number 6, of course, right from the beginning, I started out with that important quote from James Madison, the states are duty bound to interpose. It's not just a good idea, it is their duty. He said, in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are in duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the evil and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them. So very straightforward stuff from James Madison in the Virginia Resolutions of 1798 when they are exercising deliberate, palpable, and dangerous powers not granted by the Constitution. It is their duty to interpose to arrest the progress of the evil. It's not much different than what the very moderate John Dickinson said, what I cited earlier in Fabius number 4. It is their duty to watch and their right to take care that the Constitution be preserved. Or in the Roman phrase on perilous occasions, to provide that the Republic receive no damage. Wow, I guess I kind of almost remembered that one. Here's how St. George Tucker put it in his view of the Constitution of the United States, because it really... this duty to interpose is really kind of tied in with the oath of office, the oath to the Constitution. And Tucker put it like this: acts of Congress to be binding must be made pursuant to the Constitution. Otherwise, they are not laws, but a mere nullity, or what is worse, acts of usurpation. And it is in this same book, View of the Constitution of the United States, where he said usurpation is treason against the sovereignty of the people. But he continued, the people are not only not bound by them, but the several departments and officers of the government, both governments, both federal and state, are bound by oath to oppose them. Not just to talk about it, not just to complain about it, not just to ask the government violating the Constitution to stop violating the Constitution. Hey, government, stop, or I'll say stop again. No, that's not what it is. He said, for being bound by oath to support the Constitution, they must violate that oath whenever they give their sanction by obedience or otherwise to any unconstitutional act of any department of the government. Now, Alexander Hamilton, surprise, surprise, was not a fan of Madison's Virginia resolutions of 1798. He certainly was not a fan of Jefferson's Kentucky resolutions of 1798 either. But here he is, just a couple of months after Madison's resolutions passed. Again, finally, they were passed on Christmas Eve, 1798. He's calling for, well, expanding a professional military, a standing army. He said measures for raising the military force should proceed with activity. And then what does he call for? Well, he's calling for, some kind of a crisis to go in and take that army like he did. Like he said, we wish we had. Basically, he was complaining that he didn't have a bigger, stronger professional military to march into Western Pennsylvania during the Whiskey Rebellion. He was nervous the whole time. He was saying that, this volunteer militia might just go home. And so that's why, in response to Virginia, we need a strong standing army. He said, when a clever force has been collected, let them be drawn towards Virginia, for which there is an obvious pretext, and then let measures be taken to act upon the laws and put Virginia to the test of resistance. He did not mess around. Hamilton was really nasty. Anyways, here's John Dickinson writing in response to Thomas Jefferson after having received a copy of Madison's report of 1800, those which went into very great detail of the Virginia resolutions of 1798. And here's how Dickinson described them. It is an inestimable contribution to the cause of liberty. And if it was possible that anything could be justly compared with the importance of truth, it might be said that the manner is equal to the matter. Serious stuff from John Dickinson. He said, how incredible. And he's like thinking about why is this even happening? These Alien Sedition Acts, he doesn't name them exactly, but obviously the fact that the Virginia resolutions were passed and then Madison had to explain them in so much detail, he's like, what the heck is going on? How incredible was it once, and how astonishing is it now that every measure and every pretense of the stupid and selfish stewards should be adopted by the posterity of those who fled from their madness and tyranny to the distant and dangerous wilds of America. I mean, the states are duty bound to step up and keep the feds within the bounds of the Constitution. When the feds refuse to follow the rules given to them, of course, that's 24/7, 365. And these are timeless and essential principles from the father of the Constitution. I think it is a Christmas gift for the ages. So we want to spread them around as widely as possible, and absolutely nothing helps us roll up our sleeves and get that job done every day more than the financial faith and support of our members. While you're here, I'd be very grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us as a member today so we can kick off the next year, the next decade in support of the Constitution and liberty, whether the government likes it or not. They certainly do not. Our membership program starts out at just a measly $2 a month, but every $2 is huge to us. No one punches above their weight class better than the TAC. So $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. You can also help us spread the word by subscribing, leaving comments in the archives, getting notifications, reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, watching on the mainstream video platforms. The more watch time you have, the more likely they'll be to show us to more people. I am very grateful for all your help and support. I should point out that I'm going to be off probably all next week and maybe the week after through Christmas and New Year's. I definitely have 1 or 2 episodes planned. I'm just not certain when I'm going to do those. I'm definitely going to be covering the Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac in the near future, and also Thomas Jefferson's first inaugural address. I think it's probably the most important inaugural address in American history, but stay tuned. I'll just get those published maybe 1 a week over the next couple of weeks. We'll see how that plays out. But anyways, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope it made you think. All that stuff is more important than anything. And even more important than that, I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.